So for about a nanosecond, the political world was talking about Donald Trump's taxes. The least surprising part of the conversation was that Trump had cheated and dodged millions of dollars in taxes and probably broke the law multiple times. Now, why is that the least surprising part? Because he's rich, or at least richer than you and me, even if he's deeply in debt. He's filed for bankruptcy numerous times, but for marketing himself as a product, meaning selling Donald Trump, the huckster, to willing media companies, he'd be dead broke. But virtually every rich person does what Trump does. They use the tax code to dodge paying their fair share, which costs us tens of billions of dollars every year, and they do it with the willing cooperation of Congress, both parties, which is what I'm going to focus on today. This is Jonathan Tassini, and it's great to have you with us for our show for October 7th, 2020. Our sponsor, as usual, is the American Postal Workers Union, which fights for dignity and respect for its 200,000 members and retirees and 2,000 private sector mail workers. Please do go over and sign up for the show at our YouTube site. That's the Working Life Show with Jonathan Tassini. That helps spread this video and the content of this video far and wide. And of course, if you want to become a sponsor of the show, you can do that in two ways. You can go over to workinglife.org, look for our link to Patreon through our podcast tab, and there you can become a sponsor either on a one-time basis or on a regular monthly basis, or you can do that, as I often remind you, with ActBlue, because we've partnered up with ActBlue, the place that's collecting a ton of money for candidates this year. And if you're more familiar with ActBlue, please do go over to ActBlue, sign up there. You can become a sponsor there as well, either on a one-time basis or a regular basis. Now, this should be an obvious point to all of us. It's really easy to know whether a regular person is paying the right level of taxes because, hey, most people have their taxes deducted regularly from their paychecks, right? And even if you're an independent contractor like me, whoever's paying you has to file reports, 1099 statements with the IRS. So typically, the IRS gets information directly from the employers who pay us. But very rich people live a different life, obviously, in many ways. Their income is moved around and hidden in trusts, in foundations, hard to understand complex partnerships, in a whole web of limited liability companies. And especially for those who have operations overseas, they've got it stashed in overseas bank accounts. And on top of that, the rich have an army of accountants and lawyers whose sole job it is to hide their income. We know that. They use the tax laws as aggressively as possible to try to confuse the limited IRS staff, which has been cut to the bone, and then they fight the IRS for every single nickel that the IRS somehow manages to find. Now, that costs us, all us taxpayers together, a minimum of $50 billion. And it does cost us because every dollar that a rich person or a corporation doesn't pay is another dollar that we, average people, have to pony up. This is the fault of both parties, because politicians of both parties have helped build the hundreds and thousands of loopholes that rich people and corporations use to avoid paying taxes. Now, all of that is not a huge surprise to David Cay Johnston. David is the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who wrote Perfectly Legal, the Covert Campaign to Rig Our Tax System to Benefit the Super Rich and Cheat Everybody Else. I love that title. And he wrote that back in 2003. And alas, it's all still true, and it's getting worse. And he's now here to tell us why. Now, when we last spoke, David, it was actually after Trump had been inaugurated, and it was connected to your great book, The Making of Donald Trump. And you've spent, I would say, unfortunately, many, many days of your life thinking and writing about Donald Trump. But what I really want to focus mostly on, although you're free to raise as much as you want about Trump, is this amazing book called Perfectly Legal, which I got at the time it came out. And it's actually back in 2003. And the subtitle is The Covert Campaign to Rig Our Tax System to Benefit the Super Rich and Cheat Everybody Else. Now, as you and I know, Donald Trump is especially good at cheating. And that was the subtext of the text of that entire New York Times investigation. But what I really want to kind of focus on a little bit and mostly is, isn't this what all rich people do because of the way the system is set up?
Well, all rich people don't cheat. All rich people take advantage of a tax code that is disgraceful. And basically, in America, we have two income tax systems, separate and unequal. One system is for people who earn a living through their labor, the vast majority of us. Congress does not trust us. So your taxes are taken out of your paycheck or your pension check or your stipend from a school before you get your money. And the amount of money that you got before taxes is reported and verified for the IRS by your employer or whoever else you got money from.
Or if you're an independent
That
contractor,
system,
they're the 1099s, right? So that's a big
well, we're
part
going to
of
get to them.
Okay.
We're going to get to them. We'll
Okay.
get to them. We'll get to them. Under that system, the IRS says that 99.7% of the money withheld from paychecks ends up in the hands of the government. And that would make sense. I mean, here and there are going to be firms that fail and the money isn't in the bank or whatever, but that's clearly a phenomenally successful system. There's an entirely different system for business owners. You can be a little business owner like me as a author and freelance writer, or you can be Donald Trump with international holdings. Mm-hmm. Congress trusts business owners that they will report every dollar of income, even though it's not verified. They will only take the deductions that are allowed, and they will pay all of the taxes the law says are due. It is a system designed to promote rampant underreporting of income, overreporting of deductions, and short-changing the government. Now, layer onto that, a lot of what Perfectly Legal is about, by the way, still in print after all these years, and that is all of the special rules that wealthy people lobbied for, that for many wealthy people allows them to make a profit off the income tax system. All multinational corporations, if they're properly managed, make a profit off the income tax system. And Donald Trump personally went to Congress in 1991 and lobbied for and got a provision that allows him, or at least allowed him when he owned lots of real estate, to live tax-free. Now, Donald Trump doesn't own a lot of real estate anymore. You know, when his father died, instead of going, wow, look at all the revenue I'm going to get from all these apartments, thousands and thousands of apartments in the outer boroughs of New York, and they don't have any debt on them, and this is a wonderful cash machine. Money burns a hole in Donald's pocket. He's not a business person. Business people are folks who start a business to create wealth. They don't take all their money out of the business as fast as they can. They reinvest in the business. Donald never reinvests. He just spends. And so Donald was able, when he owned a lot of real estate, to live tax-free. I actually had lunch with him one day in 1990 and gave him advice on how he had more deductions that he could use and a way that he could lawfully basically sell those deductions without running into problems with the New Jersey Casino Control Commission. And Donald, claims he's the world's greatest expert on taxes. He couldn't follow my advice. He doesn't know anything. It's all a fraud. So wealthy people take advantage of the law, and the scandal there is that they get the law written for their benefit through campaign contributions. But Donald does more than that. Donald is a criminal level tax cheat. In 1984, he was the subject of fraud trials, tax fraud trials by the city of New York and the state of New York. He filed what's called a Schedule C. That's what you and I file as freelancers, sole proprietors. And in his Schedule C for a consulting business, and all it said was consulting, he showed zero income and claimed over $600,000 of deductions. And surprise, surprise, auditors of the state and city said, oh, wait a minute, show us your receipts. Here's the astonishing thing that happened, and it's surprising Donald Trump wasn't prosecuted criminally. the family's longtime tax lawyer and tax accountant, Jack Mitnick, was the only witness who testified. And the judge in the city case, administrative law judge, but nonetheless a judge, showed him the tax return that had been submitted to the government. And it's a photocopy. It didn't have what's called a wet signature from an ink pen. And Jack Mitnick looked at the return and testified, and I'm paraphrasing a little. Your Honor, that is my signature, but neither I nor my firm prepared that tax return, and I did not sign that tax return. Donald Trump is a forger. Mm. And the judge ruled that in both cases, the judges ruled that he had to pay all the taxes, he had to pay interest. The state judge made him pay the penalties. The city judge said that he was going to waive the penalties because there was no original tax return. He wanted to minimize the risk of appeal and further issues about it. I mean, a really gracious thing that, not the kind of thing that, say, poor black and brown people accused on the streets of the non-statutory crime called contempt of cop would ever get as a break.
Okay, so you said a couple of things that I just want to circle back on just to make the point about the big picture, and you've articulated very well what Donald does, that he's a cheat in those ways you described. Here are the two things that I want to connect. One is you said Congress assumes that people are going to pay their taxes based on the tax structure that they create.
The business people are.
Business people. And the second thing you said, though, was that effectively these tax laws are written because of lobbyist money, because of the campaign finance rules. So the people in Congress must know when they put these loopholes in that people are going to use those to cheat. I mean, it's not a secret. So it's kind of like a little bit of a sham, isn't it, that we're saying as if Congress is just this standing by idly and saying, oh, my God, isn't this terrible? They set up the rules that create this picture.
Well, and many of them don't really understand what they're doing. And let me give you an example of a special interest favor that led to a murder. IBM wanted a particular tax favor, and it was about a $5 million or $50 million a year expenditure, bupkis in the federal budget. But under the budget rules at the time, they had to find a $50 million offset. So somebody came up with at IBM this cockamamie idea that you should not allow freelance software writers, as opposed to you and I, freelance, English writers. Freelance software writers should not be allowed to be Schedule C sole proprietors, the thing we talked about at the beginning of this. They should have to be employees so that all of their taxes are fully collected. Well, a study was done after this took effect, and because the IRS can identify people who that's how they make their living. And what did it show? Well, it showed that people who write software are much more compliant than the average taxpayer. I mean, what a shocking idea. People who deal in the deep arcane of how to make digits and things work and the magic of your computer understand how to fill out a tax return better than the average American and pay their taxes. So a lawyer named Harvey Shulman went to Congress on behalf of the people who are called job brokers, who connect freelance software writers with companies that need customized software, and try to get Congress to change this. And even the sponsor of the bill on behalf of IBM, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, came to realize this was a mistake and it should be undone. Well, nobody did anything. Congress didn't take it off the books. And about 10 years ago, a furious freelance software writer in Austin, Texas, whose life was completely falling apart, wrote a suicide note denouncing this law and how unfair it was, mostly attacking the IRS when it really was Congress. IRS are just the tax police administering the laws they're given. And after all, you don't blame the street cop for the murder statute, right? You blame the legislature. And he went and got in his private airplane and he crashed it into the IRS rented offices in a building in Austin, Texas, and killed a Vietnam veteran who had, of course, nothing to do with this case. So, I mean, these can be very serious matters. And no one I know defends our existing tax code. And by the way, you'll hear people say it's 70,000 pages. Nonsense. It's less than 4,000 pages, but there's no reason for it to be 4,000 pages long. My next book, which I dropped when Trump announced his campaign in 2015, will propose an entirely new federal tax code in which everybody will pay their taxes. It will encourage savings and investment. It will allow wealthy people to hold on to their wealth during their lifetimes, so long as they don't spend it. You want to reach into your investment account and spend the money. Right now, there are all sorts of vehicles to let you not pay your taxes. Nope, you want to spend it, you're going to pay your taxes. And well, you can always figure out how to cheat. I have set up a series of rules that would make cheating require a criminal conspiracy for which both the taxpayer and anybody else participating with that person ought to go to prison if they're convicted. And there's no what's called mens rea. You did it, you go to prison. There are many crimes like that. And you can end up paying 3 times the amount of tax plus interest on both sides, which means the government could collect 6 times the normal amount of revenue for somebody who's engaged in criminal tax fraud.
And are you far enough along in your research and your thinking about the book that you can tell my audience roughly, if we adopted your system, how much we would garner in terms of revenue to the Treasury that we're not getting now, more or less?
What we would be able to do is significantly lower tax rates and raise the exemption on taxes. That is, right now it's $12,000 of income as a single person, $18,000 for a head of household, $24,000 for a married couple before your income is taxable, and that's frankly much too low. Adam Smith taught over 200 years ago that an income tax should only apply to surplus income. That if you tax what he called the necessaries of life, we would call the necessities of life today, that all you're doing is raising the cost of labor and distorting the economy. A secondary point in my book will be that were we to adopt universal health care with a single payer system, the way the French and the Germans do this, the amount of money that it would save, and people should listen carefully to what I'm about to say because it's an astonishing number. The amount of money that we would save if we had the French or German universal healthcare systems, which every study shows are superior to American healthcare, you could get your first $500,000 of income each year without paying any income tax.
And is that because of the deduction? Is that because of the deduction on taxes that companies use for healthcare?
No. It's because our system is so we don't have a healthcare system.
Right. We
know
that's
corrupt. We have a non-system sick care system, and we spend 6 percentage points of our economy more on healthcare than the French and the Germans. And 6 percentage points of the economy is basically the amount of income tax paid by people who make less than $500,000 a year.
But changing the tax code is not what would bring that. It would be changing the healthcare system, or did I miss that
That's
point?
That's right. Right now, we use the tax code to subsidize and deal with healthcare in ways that drive up costs and drive up your taxes.
Yeah.
And the other thing my system would do is right now, we have literally people in America, Jonathan, who report multi-billion, billion with a B, dollar annual income. The highest tax rate in the United States cuts in at $500,000 of income. So a married couple, let's say a doctor married to a lawyer, who work all year, long hours all year and make $500,000. Don't feel sorry for them. They got a lot of money, but they are putting in 4,000 hours of labor every year. They pay the maximum tax rate on their next dollar. But someone who simply sits back and collects dividends from their company and gets $1 billion a year, let's see, Bill Gates from Microsoft.
Jeff Bezos from Amazon.
Well, they don't pay dividends at Amazon, but he can sell stock and he'll pay 20%, whereas the worker will pay 37 plus Social Security taxes and payroll taxes, and will pay state taxes. And, you know, on $1 billion, you have a lower tax rate. In fact, once you get above $8 million of income in America, what happens is the tax system is progressive. It goes up. The more you make, the larger the share of your income goes to government. They get to 8 million. And then it starts to fall. And once you get up to like $1 billion, it falls away to nothing.
Now, one point I want to make, and then I want to talk a little bit about the IRS. Let's say your tax proposal comes out, it comes before Congress. You know, based on history, that both parties are responsible for the mess we're in terms
Yep.
of the loopholes. That's clear. That it, on a bipartisan basis, many legislators have allowed lobbyists to riddle the tax system full of loopholes. So while
Yep.
it's fun to dump on Donald Trump because, as you point out, he is an actual cheat, let's face it, it's both parties have done this. So what makes you feel like someone would take your proposal and run with it when they're all susceptible to this notion of, especially because of campaign contributions, that, hey, we're going to do the bidding of the lobbyists?
Right. So I've had my tax proposal reviewed by one of the very top tax avoidance lawyers in America, one of the most respected and best at helping rich people avoid taxes. I've had business owners who understand tax, accounting professors, economists, a whole bunch of people have gone over it. Nobody pokes a hole in it. They all say it absolutely works. I figured it all out. One professor looked at me and said, I took this meeting thinking, what a joke. Some reporter thinks he can write a new tax law. And I got to tell you, you did it. But they all also then say, here's the problem. The wealthiest people in America and the corporate lobbyists will never let it happen, even though I get rid of the corporate income tax. And the reason is the corporate income tax is a source of profit. Apple in 2017 alone made $120 billion gain off the corporate income tax. Well, my theory about this is very simple. Real change in America comes from the bottom. It wasn't presidents of the United States who got rid of slavery. It was Abraham Lincoln ultimately signing the limited Emancipation Proclamation because of a war at the bottom. Women got the right to vote after a struggle that began long before Seneca Falls in 1848. So more than 7 decades just for that fight, because there was popular support that was built down below. We got clean air and water laws signed by Richard Nixon, of all people, really good clean air and water laws that Trump is trashing because of public demand. So if enough people read my book, which will be short and easy to read and I'm not writing a tome of doorstop. If enough people read the book and say, why aren't we doing this? Then it will overcome the money. We have the power somehow in this country since the 60s, when I was in high school and then college, and there was all this talk of empowerment. We have created a society where people will tell you all the time, we're powerless. There's nothing we can do about it. The corporations are everything. Nonsense. You're being lazy. You're not being a citizen. Do the work of being a citizen, and we can turn this country into a wonderful paradise. We can be what we were intended to be, which is a society that will ennoble the human spirit, free the human spirit to see what we can achieve. It'll never be without conflict and difficulty and people who are corrupt as well as people who are saints. But we can have a much better society, but not so long as people say, I don't want to do with politics. What's football games on tonight? And I believe that if I can get enough people to read this book, including, by the way, a number of I know a number of wealthy business people. Some of them are multi-billionaires, but many of them are centimillionaires, $100 million and up fortunes.
Poor people, you mean?
Yeah, no, these are people who are people who created and built real businesses and live way below their means. The ones I've gone over it with them, they all go, this would be a much better law for my business. And I go, good. When the book comes out, then you want to change it. That's what you need to do. And by the way, you can't just repeal the corporate income tax, because if you did, the economy would grind to a halt, because risk-averse executives who do not own a company but are employees, the standard CEO out there, they would just stuff money into a mattress as an insurance policy against a downturn in the economy. You have to have a set of rules which are already on the books, but only apply to small business. That you've got to pay the money to the owners, pay the money to the workers, or reinvest in the business. And with those rules, we could have a much more vibrant economy and get people off this avoiding taxes. And by the way, avoiding taxes has ruined many fortunes. Lots of people saying, oh, I don't want to pay $10 million, have cost themselves $100 million.
Now, from firsthand experience, I'll say to my audience, having read Perfectly Legal and David's other books, I can assure folks that David's forthcoming book will be very, very, very readable. That's the way he writes. And I want to now dig a little bit into the reality of what the IRS faces. So you wrote a terrific op-ed piece a couple of days ago, and in it, and I want to excerpt from the piece, just a couple of sentences. It's titled perfectly, Two Tax Systems, One for the Likes of Trump, and obviously one, for the rest of us. And there are two sentences that are really important that I want you to expand on.
This is in the LA Times.
That's correct, in the Los Angeles Times. Thank you for underscoring that. Since 2010, the number of tax returns has grown about 8%, but the number of IRS revenue agents, as auditors are called, has been cut 35%, criminal investigators 27%, and the agency's total staffing by 22%. And then a couple of sentences later, you say that the IRS is, quote, so overwhelmed that they have no plans, and I want my audience to listen to this, to pursue more than 500,000 high-income Americans who didn't file tax returns from 2014 through 2016 and owe billions of dollars to our government. So talk a few minutes about what's happened to the IRS. It's often an agency that at least some of the country has no particular fondness for, but it does do the work of trying to collect taxes. What's happening there?
Well, Congress has defunded the tax police. I mean, that's what the IRS are. They are the tax police. They don't make the rules. They are the ones who carry them out. And this campaign began with Ronald Reagan. As recently as 1988, your odds of being audited if you made over $100,000 a year, which today would be about $300,000 or $400,000 a year, were multiples of what they are now. If you make $1 million a year or more, and remember, some Americans make several billion dollars year after year after year, your odds of being audited are once every 33 years. That is not an intimidating factor if you're going to cheat. And so people chisel, they cheat, and many of them have hundreds and thousands of businesses. Donald Trump has over 500 businesses. I've talked to an IRS agent who had to audit somebody once who had over 6,000 separate corporations. And auditing this person turned out to be easy, according to the agent, because they were really sloppy and cheap and didn't spend enough money on lawyers. But had they been serious about it, the person told me, it would have taken forever to figure out what they owed. And here's how really bad it is at the IRS in terms of enforcing the law. They don't even enforce the law against you and me. We can't cheat. Congress has set up a system because it doesn't trust us. We can't cheat. William Koch is the third Koch brother. He lives one door away from Mar-a-Lago, and he's the only Koch brother who supported Donald Trump. He is in the petroleum coke business. It's just like the coal coke business that's used to make steel and to burn for fuel in Asia. He set up a device under which he is getting his $100 million a year of profits, but claiming that they're not profits, because he washes them through a 1,200 square foot storefront in Nassau, Bahamas, in a shopping center. And he says they're new capital contributions from his fortune. We have documents proving he was under criminal investigation by the IRS in 2016. Donald Trump gets elected. The IRS immediately drops the investigation. Now, I don't believe that Bill Koch called up his friend or walked down the street, it's a 4-minute walk, to Mar-a-Lago and had to lobby Trump. I think the people at the IRS were smart enough to say, you don't want to go after this guy because all hell will come down on the agency. And so they let it go. But here's a man making $100 million a year and paying no income taxes. We did a 5-part series about him at DC Report. And if you just go to DC Report and in the search engine, put in Koch, K-O-C-H, Koch Papers, you'll see the 5-part series. And one of the parts, by the way, is about a house deal up in New England that is equally squirrely and should have been investigated. But how many other cases are out there like that? Tons of them, tons of them. And I worry less about people who are taking advantage of the rules Congress has put in place, awful as they are, much as they need to be repealed, than about the fact that we have people who are thumbing their nose at the tax system. They're doing what Donald Trump is doing. They are engaged in what seems very clearly in this case, and I'm positive in Donald's case, is criminal level tax cheating. And law enforcement isn't doing anything. I mean, imagine what happened in your community if the cops suddenly said, oh, we don't have any resources to investigate murders and rapes anymore, but we do have the best tricycle theft squad in America.
Right. And compared to what these rich people and these corporations have, which are armies of lawyers, tax experts, and accountants whose sole job it is to help as much dodging, if I can use that term, as possible. Yeah. And they're basically lining up against that individual tax person at the IRS. So that person is always going to be outgunned.
Well, and I actually talked to somebody who audited Trump's tax returns once when he was a relatively young man. And he said the first thing that happened was this aggressive attack by Trump's lawyers who basically indicated, we're going to ruin your career. We're going to tie you up forever. Every mistake you make, we're going to turn you in for. And, he ultimately, decided that there were other better ways to spend his time. Years ago, I wrote the story about backdated stock options, a story I broke. But the Wall Street Journal won the Pulitzer Prize for, even though I broke the story. And that was just massive cheating by Wall Street companies. And there was never anything done. Nothing was ever done. Al Gore, as a director of Apple, participated in a fraud in which Apple ginned up minutes of a meeting of the board of directors that never took place. Nobody was prosecuted. Nobody was fined. Nobody was penalized. Well, if you don't enforce laws, guess what happens? I mean, I don't want to have a police officer at every street corner making sure you come to a full stop. Okay? That's nuts. But when people flagrantly violate the law, when they get caught, to not have the resources to enforce the law. I mean, just imagine, literally think what Donald Trump said through his lawyer in court. Donald Trump said during the campaign, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and wouldn't lose a vote. Well, earlier in 2020, his lawyer, George Consovoy, was asked by a federal judge exactly what that meant. And the judge listened to the answer and he said, are you saying if Donald Trump murdered someone on Fifth Avenue, the New York Police Department could not investigate that crime? And the lawyer said, yes, they could not investigate that crime, at least not so long as Trump is president. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, that's not a country of laws and rules. That's not a democracy. That's a dictatorship. That is King Louis XIV, who Donald thinks he is. I am the state. Mm.
And so as a roundup question, kind of to go back to the macro view, and I know you've thought a lot about this. One of the reasons that I spend a lot of time on this podcast, and I have since we started it, talking about taxes with experts like yourself, my friends from the Institute for Taxation and Economic Policy, you know them quite well.
Very good people.
They're great people. Is that, and there's two aspects to that. One is obviously it's about how we fund our society and how we are able to do the things that people need. For example, single payer healthcare, education, right. You go down the list. But the other point is the way in which taxes have been used as a political divide. And it's obviously on the part of Republicans mostly, but also Democrats have played that game too. And so what you end up with is a big chunk of the country saying, I don't want to pay my taxes. My taxes are too heavy on me. It's too much of a burden, when in fact, the bigger problem is what people are getting away with a tax system that does not work for real people.
Yeah, so I think this is the way you have to think about both sides of the equation, the inflow of money through taxes and the outflow for how we spend it. We just spent $13 billion to build Gerald Ford, the first of the new generation of nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, which has replaced all the steam catapults and things with electromagnetic launchers. So they can fling much heavier airplanes into the sky and they can do it vastly quicker. Yeah. And when you build one of these, you also have to build, I think it's 4 attack submarines, a couple of frigates, an oiler. There's a whole bunch of ships in a flotilla around the aircraft carrier.
To service it and protect it.
To service
right?
it and protect it.
Yeah.
Well, with modern hypersonic nuclear missiles, you can take the whole thing out before you even know the missile is coming. Why are we putting all this money into World War II? Going back, and the generals and admirals want to refight World War II, which we won after all. Other countries have discovered that cyber warfare and other techniques are vastly less expensive and highly effective. And after all, the Russians successfully put their favorite candidate into the White House. And so we need to think about the spending side of this. And Jimmy Carter proposed, when he was president, something called zero-based budgeting.
I remember.
I don't know if that's exactly the way to go, but an awful lot of what the federal government is doing, we don't need to do. It's also, by the way, outside of the military, mostly chicken feed. It's little bits of money. All right, so we spend some money helping people sell butter overseas and subsidizing growers of sunflower seeds and things like that. Interestingly, we do not subsidize anywhere the growing of vegetables that are good for you, spinach and kale and things like that. We subsidize grains. So I think we need to fundamentally rethink our budget. And I think people legitimately have a real complaint, especially because of this fact. Between 1969 and 2018, that's a half century, the average income of the bottom 90% of Americans, that's everybody who makes less than $134,000 a year, increased in real terms after adjusting for inflation. After 50 years, you know how much it went up? $218 a year. $218.
So these are important points about policy issues, about spending, and obviously. Right. The assault on unions has pushed down wages, but
let me just go one more.
Yeah.
The year that unions had their greatest effect was 1973. About 37% of private sector workers belong to unions. Today, it's about 6%. Compared to 1973, and I picked that because it's 45 years ago and we have our 45th president. The income of the bottom 90% is down 4%. It's down $1,600 a year. So people at the bottom 90%, who I championed in books like Perfectly Legal and Free Lunch, they have real grievances. They just don't understand what's happened to them. And what's happened is, through Congress, the rule book has been rewritten, the tax rules have been rewritten, the spending rules have been rewritten to create a massive socialist state that takes from the many and puts into the pockets of the already rich few. And I can't think of a better example of that than what Donald Trump did in the 2017 Trump tax law. He gave every multinational company an 85% discount on their, an 87% discount on their untaxed earnings that they had siphoned out of the US and sent overseas by converting them through accounting into expenses. He gave them, if they built a factory, they got a better tax deduction. They got 92% forgiveness than if they put the money into financial instruments. Then they got only an 85% tax break, not 92%. And after cutting their taxes, in Apple's case, an $88 billion tax bill, they lopped off $50 billion. You don't have to pay us $50 billion. And then they loaned Apple the $38 million balance at zero interest for 8 years, and you pay it almost all at the end. It's backloaded. Apple will make $70 billion investing the $38 billion because of how high its return is to its shareholders. $120 billion gift to Apple. Did you get something like that? I didn't get anything like that.
The average person obviously didn't. And so the fundamental point is, in fact, that what this did is create the sense and the lack of support for the government and for society, because at least half and perhaps more, depending on what polls say, of the people don't have faith in this system.
What a smart system. We at the top are gonna rip you off. Exactly. And we're going to make you hate the system we're using to rip you off so we can rip you off more. I mean, that's why people need, I know none of us want to think about death or taxes. I get that. I've spent my life thinking about both of those. But, the reality is, if you don't think about them, you're going to get your pocket picked. And the people who get rich off government, it's so much easier to make money off the government than to earn it in the marketplace. They're going to say, what do I need the marketplace for? And when I do have a market, I'll just rig it. We'll create monopolies and duopolies and restrain trade, and then we'll get richer. And you want to start a little business? Well, you're going to discover quickly the big boys will make it difficult to impossible for you. And we're going to get all sorts of subsidies. You aren't going to get any. We're going to thumb our nose at the law. You're going to have inspectors checking you out. That's what we've set up. And people need to realize that. And we have the power to change that. But we can't do it if we say, oh, no, I want to watch football or baseball or whatever your sport is.
Well, we can do both. We can say, hey, I'll watch baseball because I do too, but I'm going to cut out a big part of my time to change the system.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, David, thanks again, as usual, for being on the show. And when your new book comes out, we're going to spend an entire show going through that book and talking about it.
Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you for all the things you've done on behalf of freelance writers. Their fate's a lot worse today, but that's not your fault. It's conditions in the economy and this discovery called the internet that has been destroying a lot of people's business models and will destroy more. The only one that seems resistant to it is real estate, and that's because the real estate business is all built on racism.
That'll do it for this week's show. Thanks to my incredible guest, David Cay Johnston. Hey, you should pick up a copy of his book from 2003, Perfectly Legal. It's really still relevant. And as I promised, as I spoke to him, when his new book comes out about how to redo the tax system, we are going to have him back on the show. Our editor, as usual, is David Hebden. Our major sponsor is the American Postal Workers Union. As usual, you can help us in two ways. You can sign up for the show at our YouTube channel, The Working Life Show with Jonathan Tassini. That helps us get that show out far and wide in the video world. And you can become a sponsor of this show. You can do that in two ways. Go over to Working Life, look for the podcast tab, and find your way over to Patreon, where you can become a sponsor of the show either on a one-time basis or on a regular monthly basis. And you can also do that through ActBlue. We've partnered up with ActBlue. Go over to ActBlue, sign up, either as a sponsor on a one-time basis or on a regular basis. Thanks for being with us. Look forward to having you back next week.